Which one? Oh. Hank. How old's Hank now?
11.5.
Are you?
That is a March dog, so that from he was 11
Yeah.
March, so he's about 11.5.
You are 11.5, Hank. Right, let's see if anyone's here. There you go. Participants. Oh, neat. Hey, Tim. Hello? Hello?
Hello, Karen.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
Good morning.
Are you well?
I'm good. Yes, I'm good.
Oh, there's you in your home.
My study. Yes.
Your sanctuary.
Yes.
How lovely.
Yes. It is. It's a good spot.
Oh,
Should straighten the pictures though. Got a
well, you
few
should,
pictures there.
especially from my perspective, being a curator, also being very picky. That's right. Oh, there you go. Heaps better.
Good one.
Heaps better. Oh, okay. You'll be happy to know that I've pressed the recording button.
Yeah, no, I saw that.
Good. Oh, okay, fine. That probably means that what's his name? Bob Whitaker probably noticed that I wasn't recording as well. I must mention it to him soon.
So you lost all that footage then? That was...
I did, but apart from the last 6 minutes, and I'll just edit that down to a couple of minutes for this international symposium of hoo-ha hoo-ha.
Yeah.
Because I have a very tight deadline for that, and I'll get in contact with him and explain. And I've just learned, that he's a really easy man to deal with.
Yeah.
He's just lovely and simple, and that is a huge, great weight off my mind, really. So I don't need to be terrified to the extent that I have been.
Yeah. So that is good, because we often construct ideas about people without any evidence, which because we haven't met them. But it's good if they come out to be nice people and approachable people.
I love that. It's my favorite thing in life. One of many. So what I'll do, and I've learned over the last month or so, that I'm pretty dodgy when it comes to this, to be totally honest. And there'll be just a whole pile of editing and a lot of umming and ahhing, and too bad, really. That's as it is. And so what I'll do to start off with is to read some of your bio from the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. Yes.
Yep.
And thank you, Tim Heffernan, for joining us today at lovely Kilcare Beach, but also as part of Alice in Dunderland, Creativity and Mental Health. And Tim is an executive member of the Illawarra Shoalhaven Suicide Prevention Collaborative, and was a volunteer rural and regional ambassador and community presenter for the Black Dog Institute. In 2013, he was awarded a scholarship to attend Boston University's Global Leadership Institute to develop a co-designed project, Safety for All, which involved peer workers training mental health nurses working on acute mental health wards. So Tim's been a member of the Commission's Community Advisory Council since 2014, and he's Deputy Co-Chair for the National Mental Health Commission's Peer Workforce Development Guidelines Steering Committee. So before moving to disability support work and peer work, Tim enjoyed a 20-year teaching career He identifies as a person with lived experience of mental illness and recovery, and he's passionate about the development and support of the peer workforce. Tim's an award-winning poet and co-edits an online space for MAD, in inverted commas, writing, Clozapine Clinic, the Fore Project, in the influential Australian journal Verity La. He's published widely and performed his poetry at the Wollongong Writers Festival, the Queensland Poetry Festival, and at MAD Pride. So, Tim, that's a pretty impressive CV, and much that I didn't know, really. But it was the prime thing that I'd like us to speak about this morning, if that's okay, is your own experience of lived experience, really, and also your use of poetry. I mean, these are some of the things that you and I have chatted about before.
Yeah. I think that website for poetry is dedicated to Ben Frater. Ben Frater was a young man who was a surrealist poet who studied at Wollongong Uni and had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, who unfortunately died of a medication issue when he was 26.
Right.
He was on a drug called Clozapine, and
Right.
and so it was devoted to his poetry. I curate that site with his former partner Elise Blaney, who is also a poet, and we've published a lot of work from around the globe on that site. So it's a really good place to have a look. Clozapine Clinic, the Fore Project. But you were asking about my personal experiences of mental health issues, whatever you want to call them. The language is interesting, and I think that's good that it's fluid. Like, you know, I was on what you would call a normal trajectory going through university and being in a long-term relationship, but did start to struggle with what I'd now identify as sort of a thing that you'd call serious depression when I was in my last year of uni, my first year as doing my dip ed, when I was doing my dip ed, which resulted in a number of things, in a breakdown of that long-term relationship, difficulties with work and study. It moved into my first year of teaching and things, and so I found that quite difficult, teaching in a boys' school in Albury, Catholic boys' school. My second year, I had sought help for that through my GP, and he basically said, "Well, you need to lighten up." I think was more of that sort of thing. But I experienced a surge of energy and creativity in my second year of teaching, and in the end, halfway through the second term, I ended up chasing the head teacher maths around the playground with a fire extinguisher after a little encounter, and then offered my resignation to the Christian brother who was the principal of the school at the time, and sort of from there went on a creative odyssey, I suppose, for about 6 months, going to Melbourne and trying to work in advertising and various different pursuits before coming back to Wagga, where I was living then with my parents, to do some casual teaching. But gradually, I became more awake, I suppose, and not able to sleep and all that stuff. And this was in 1983, which was around the time of Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program. It was right in the midst of the Cold War. We had the invasion of Grenada. We had the downing of a KAL 007 jetliner airplane. We had a number of global tensions happening at the time I was beginning to move into a different space, and that space was around a belief that I had to live past my birthday, which was the 10th of November.
Right.
Otherwise, the world would end, and I'd constructed that sort of belief. And in time, I ended up in the local hospital.
Can I just interrupt you for 2 seconds and ask you what you believed, what you thought was happening to you at that time? I mean, what was your framing of those experiences, that trajectory? What did you think was going on at that time?
Well, I thought I was moving out of the discomfort of that sort of that phase where I wasn't coping with life and felt that thing called depression, I suppose, was how we frame it, and moving into a place where I was very much in control of my world, was very creative, was doing lots of stuff with different people, was teaching and working as a barman at the same time, was getting into life in a new way. So I probably was, in a sense, discovering myself, moving from what I had been to what I was becoming as a person. And I think there was some, and in that place, I was writing, for instance, I was writing my memoir, which was pretty pretentious at a young age, but it began with the title "Don't Go to School with a Hangover and Lie on the Classroom Floor," and ended up with the title "The Newest Testament." So it might give you an indication of where I was going.
Great
So,
title, both of them.
Part of all of this move into this idea that I had to live past my birthday was also sort of messianic type beliefs starting to happen, that I had some control over the destiny of the world moving through a time of turmoil and trouble into a time of paradise, sort of like the rapture, Karen, that sort of movement.
Yeah.
So I ended up in the Wagga mental health unit in November, and actually felt that was good, because at that time I needed sanctuary and safety, and those forces of evil that were out to get me couldn't get me in that hospital. And so I got through my birthday.
Yeah.
Mum baked a fruit cake and brought it up to the hospital, but and ended up, coming out of hospital still in a heightened state, and still with all sorts of connections to the world, and my environments wherever I was that were hyper. You really feel them, nature, you're at one with nature, you can perceive things, you can read things through number plates, you can commune with animals more easily, and you have these sorts of powers. That probably lasted for another 2 or 3 months after my first admission.
And can I just ask you again, when you were in that space back then, what was your interpretation of that space? I mean, were you at that time, thinking that you were mad, or thinking that you had schizophrenia, or were you scared, or were you, just in that exalted space, that place of just being? What was your reaction to your experience at that time?
Well, I was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia at that time, but in my mind, I had there was a duality of things. There was this connection to the world and the universe at a higher space, where I really did feel things. I felt differently to other people, but then there was also this imperative, which is the Western. And one of having to get back to work, of having to normalize my life and start living that life of where you're earning a wage and where you're living, not in your parents' house anymore, and those sorts of things, So I think there's always been an underlying. I don't call it like a revelation or that sort of thing, epiphany. It's a little bit like an epiphany that lasts, where you feel there is a spiritual or a connection to something greater, some greater wave of meaning. It's like, you know, the ripples of that Genesis, the band, talked about. That was an important image at the time.
Yeah.
Ripples never come back, they've gone to the other side. You know, that's that sort of exploration of what constructs meaning in our world.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or what doesn't construct meaning. Is there meaning, or is there some pattern there? I suppose. I was very attracted to the chaos theory at the time, and the idea of a butterfly's wing over here, over the other side of the world, being able to impact elsewhere. That sort of idea.
Yeah. And I guess I asked these questions, and taking into account that you and I have had quite a few conversations along these lines. And we're talking now about you back in 1983. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And you've travelled a long road since the 80s and learnt a lot. So you know things now that you didn't know back then. You know about, for a start, you know about, you know, mental illness diagnoses and / misdiagnoses and how they're constructed in the first place. And I imagine that you didn't know back then the notion of, you know, transpersonal psychology and spiritual crisis and you know what's now in the DSM as religious and spiritual problems. You didn't know any of that back then.
No. No, I only knew that when I came out of hospital the first time, I was diagnosed and given antipsychotics, and which I didn't take for very long.
Right.
And then I do know that I was then re-diagnosed a year or so later by a senior sort of psychiatrist, if you can call them senior. He was a nice enough man in Melbourne. With manic depression, which is the diagnostic label I sort of have, and identify with a long time, but I question that label a lot now.
Yeah. And do you question your, you know, the overall, regardless of whether it be schizophrenia or bipolar or manic depression or any of those diagnostic labels, do you question now that you actually did have you know, this breakdown, and now we have different terminology? You know, one of the things that you spoke about at the beginning of this was the importance of language and its fluidity. Yes, and so we know things and we speak differently, or some of us do anyway, now than we did back in 1983. So there's language to, there's different language and there's different framework to explain what we went through back then, you know, and the language and the framework is to do with spiritual crisis. Yeah. And it's, I mean, this is my view, and this was certainly my experience and many other people that I know of. And for me, I guess it pretty much always comes down to that thing of who it is that you speak to at that crucial point in time, and what their belief system is, what their education has told them is true about what you're going through. And back in 1983, you know, the people that you spoke to then, they did not have this as part of their framework. I mean, and doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists in general still don't really. But it comes down to what you, if you had seen a different psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, back in 1983 and 1984, who just had this perspective of transformation, of spiritual emergency / crisis, etc., of alchemy, you know, of a Jungian perspective, of narrative, of, you know, great forces coming to bear and elevation of mood, etc., and had, you know, that interpretation of what was happening to you. You know, and I believe, I mean, and I'm only looking at you and your life from outside, that you would not have been diagnosed in the first place.
Frozen up.
Yeah. Is it unfrozen now?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's I guess that's my general belief in having spoken to so many people and had heard so many stories. And I guess I just bring it back to my own experience of having gone through very similar stuff to what you just mentioned there, and being lucky enough not to have seen someone who had a very different framework than anything that transpersonal psychology and Jungian based theory, etc., has. And it's that crucial point in life, in time, as to who it is you take your greatness to, or strangeness, or your great strangeness, whichever it is, and how you walk out afterwards. Do you because I mean, I guess I also come from the perspective of you, with the work that you do in the peer workforce and the vast numbers of people that you've dealt with over the years, and that lovely CV of going off to far-flung places to do interesting things to do with mental health, and whether any of that very wide experience gave you a different view of what happened to you back then, and to a very large extent of what happens to a vast number of people who just end up in the mental health system for the rest of their days, in some way, shape or form, some better than others. That's a long sentence.
Yeah. Look, to try and unpack that a bit. I think all of this is a construct, an artificial construct of what's probably an unscientific science. Some people call it a pseudoscience, and it's a way of essentially, for a lot of people, it's not the thing is it's around sedating people and then it impacting on their lives a lot. Like, my experience was hitting the mental health system hard again 2 years later, and coming out of an older style institutional hospital, very unwell in terms of the way I felt about myself and about the world, and about the treatment that I'd received, which involved a lot of violence, seclusion, and restraint, and things like that. So my determination at that stage was to move, to get out of that dangerous situation, and a lot of that was, initially for me, I've taken medication which is lithium since 1985, but I've also completely left the mental health system, or left it for about 20 years when I taught high school and married and had my children. But I think we are sensitive to things, and a lot of that's to do with our experiences as children, as growing up, our connection to the world. And I think all the people you're talking about that I've met over the times, are some of often the most important and insightful people who touch the planet in absolutely critical ways that are different, because we've certainly stuffed up a lot of the way we've crushed the planet over the years rather than touched it and interacted with it. So I don't, I'm moving towards a space where it's always hard once you've been on something for a long time to come off it, and trying to come off medication off the lithium has resulted in me having a couple of other visits to those hospitals over the last few years. So it's difficult to do that once you've got that way of dealing with things. There are physical reasons that happen.
Interrupt for a second and ask you, in regards to your work with lived experience, that knowledge, that very definite knowledge of the consequences of ending up with a diagnosis and medications. That's a solid part of the learning and the teaching that goes into people who are coming from a lived experience perspective. Yes, that there are adverse impacts, that there is, you know, there are side effects, inevitably side effects, you know, that there's that thing of living 15, 20 odd years or whatever it is, less years upon the planet if the psych meds weren't present, and that extreme difficulty, you know, that phenomenal horror that so many people experience when they try and come off the medications, which is an indication of how powerful medications are in the first place, really. Yeah. And I guess it's just that thinking of that, of, you know, of course the medications are effective. You know, a drug is a drug is a drug. They're effective in quelling all of this turmoil and terror and enlightenment and being awake and connection and all of that. You know, they dampen that down, really. And that takes away a lot of what's given, I guess, at a time, you know, and there's all sorts of different ways of looking at this. But I guess it's that thing of recognizing loss.
Yeah, no, I think you know, the consumer movement or the peer movement, what peer work movement is in essence a social justice and human rights movement to try and shift the balance from that biomedical approach that is entrenched in Western mental health systems, and it's about shifting that back to looking at what's happened to people, and also, you know, looking at those strengths and beauties of people and allowing them to, you know, value that diversity that we have. It's about recognizing that often these current systems cause a lot of the so-called problems with mental health, in terms of morbidity, dangerousness, all of those things. You know, we corner people into, we push people into corners, and we wonder why people don't want to be in that corner and try to get out. You know, so but it is also, then there is a little bit of dirty hands in this, in that we're also working in systems often that are working under mental health acts where people are being treated involuntarily. So to some extent we work to mitigate some of the bad experiences and to improve conditions for people in those places under where we have mental health acts that can do that to people, you know. And the reality is, unfortunately, you know, that despite our agreement with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, we have mental health acts, we have involuntary treatment, which are contrary to those agreements. You know, I think here the consumer movement, the peer movement, and all the MAD studies and everything like that is trying to say there are different reasons for what's happening to people, what happens to people, what they experience, and how it comes out in the ways they interact with the world and others around them, that don't need a medical approach. You know, it's not. It's bullshit, really, but we're down that path, and it's about getting, you know, Alice back up the burrow, and how do you do that? I think, you know, for me, work has been important, but creativity has been a really essential part of my recovery, and still is. You know, I still write poetry, mainly haiku on Twitter at the moment because I've limited attention span at the moment. But I think, you know, we have to explore our worlds, our individual response, our collective response. You know, the consumer movement and working as from a consumer's perspective is having your own personal experience, but also being able to understand that there's a collective experience you need to understand as well. You know, that whole collective experience. But you know, art, the visual arts, poetry, writing, they're also so important. You know, I've got, you know, my friend Heidi down in Melbourne, you know, she's just published this beautiful book called My Friend Fox. And, you know, it's a fable about, it's her memoir and about her experience with mental health issues and through this companion, the fox. And it's just a beautiful fable about a person who has been diagnosed, has been labelled, and the harm that's done, but the beauty that still remains and which still comes out in people.
Yeah,
So,
and exactly.
yeah.
I mean, and I love that you stress the fact that she's written this as a fable, because I mean, this takes me back at least to the underpinnings, to the core of this Alice in Wonderland thing. You know, it's the hero's journey. It's that archetype. It's that once upon a time thing. It's that being able to turn your experience into your individual experience into something collective and universal. You know, it's that once upon a time thing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Look, and it is that thing of transformation, of alchemy, of putting something you know, in general, something beautiful into the world, really. And I guess the thing that blows me away with most people that I've come across who are involved in this world at all, you know, particularly those who have ended up with the diagnoses and the medications, and to whatever extent an unasked for and unneeded nightmare, really. And I guess in general, what I've seen is people who are very, very beautiful, gentle souls still, regardless, you know, after everything that's been done to them. And there's always that alternative reaction to great harm and great damage and trauma, you know, and it is that hate-filled approach to life. It is that ongoing anger and vengeance, etc. And I've not come across that in any of the people that I've met or worked with in this, you know, and it is that very beautiful demonstration of what you can transform your experience into. You know, My Friend the Fox sounds like something truly phenomenally good, you know. And
yeah, no, it's beautiful. And the journey, I think the journey, a lot of my poetry, or some of my poetry, centers on the walk poem or the journey. And I think movement and moving from one space to another and the interactions along the way are always full of meaning, and often we're too busy to really understand. I could read you a poem if you want. But
do read me a poem, too.
So I'll read you a poem that was written about my experiences a day or two before I went into hospital in 2005. That's when I left teaching and very quickly spiraled into a spiritual or manic episode, whichever language we choose to use. But I ended up in the hospital pretty quickly after this. And it's called It Always Begins at Central. So I walked that day seeking the signs, carrying in my backpack words trustworthy and true. My letter to the Herald didn't make the opinions page, but I wasn't surprised as it was poetry. Today's clouded sky is a gauze bandage to heal this infection. It always begins at Central, and I head down past the sleeping bag cocoons, still grubby and yet to emerge. In George Street, two more are attached by dribbling threads to the steps of St. Peter Julian and the Central Baptist Church. At St. Andrew's Cathedral, a mural of Jonah and the whale reminds me. I called to the Lord out of distress and he answered me. So I cross the road and from the footpath pick up a card, a crossword, the gospel truth. All that the Father gives me will come to me. And at Dimmicks, I buy some Vonnegut, remembering the first time I was mad with Revelations and Slaughterhouse 5.
Mm.
At Martin Place, the wreaths from Anzac Day remain clustered around the cenotaph, and I wonder if I am meant to cry, but there is no rainbow, only Lawrence begging in his greatcoat. After I palm him 20, we take communion with the continental cup of soup they are giving away. He is a socialist, so when he doesn't finish, he hands me his remains and I drink them before we part. Still thirsting, I head to the Mercantile, but Duncan's gallery trips me up with Christ amongst the landscapes. And for our family's Bible, I choose the Passion because Mel made it real to me. I take these things with me to the quay, only stopping to buy music from the Kuris playing there. Climbing the concrete steps, the Utzon room is empty, but for a suit coat draped on a chair near the tapestry, so I try it on and it fits, and I cry out in the Opera House. In the gardens of Farm Cove, I pilfer the pockets for answers. 3 pens, 1 a fountain, and a message from Aeneas Nin stitched into the lining. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Inflated, I leave my words at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and at St Mary's Cathedral, I recite my mother's rosary and pray, make me the channel of your peace. I stop to speak to Lawrence again at the intersection of George Street and Ultimo Road, and at Central, a silent Jehovah's Witness hands me a pamphlet to read on the train trip home. So that's just
That's so
a journey.
Yes, and it's a journey, and it's just chock-a-block full of place and time and people and interactions and, you know, embodiment and spirituality and belief systems and all of that chunkiness that poetry is capable of, you know, and I guess as you were reading, it just reminds me of people that I know, who I've worked with, you know, as an art therapist, who've worked with either images or poetry and have done that sort of work while they've been in hospital, that if they had been dealing with someone who was coming from a perspective of actually understanding that this was important and needed to be unpacked and looked at very, very beautifully, that, you know, chances are that they would not have been diagnosed in the first place. They would not have continued to be medicated, etc. They would be, this would have been recognised as something that was expressing all that was going on inside them in the internal world. And it's that connection between the internal world and that grace that's given to many of us during those extreme moments. And that you turn into something truly beautiful and meaningful for yourself. And if that's not recognized as that by either yourself or the people that you're dealing with in that place, in that headspace, in that, you know, emotional turmoil, ongoing mad thing, or whatever your version of that is, then it's a lost opportunity. You know, in my view, it's a lost opportunity, and it brings back to me the importance of having those people, you know, in power, making the decisions, as opposed, you know, and it's just open dialogue. You know, it's just open dialogue and you know, all of those different ways of working with this, so that people are looking at you differently, so that you end up looking at yourself differently, and that's all it is. You know, it's all it is.
Yeah, and it's about that, you know, not losing the importance of that movement into what we call delusional psychosis, I suppose. You know, when I, you know, inevitably, well, it always begins at Central. The title was that whenever I was sort of a bit heightened and moving into a episode, I would walk, you know, get off at Central and walk the spine of Sydney, down George Street or Pitt Street or something, or then loop off to the sides, either Barangaroo and that area, or the gardens. And all those times was a connection with other people. Like, it was like the world had flipped, and everybody, it was like that people, it was like, you know, you had that idea that people were in on this secret of revelation of the rapture. Yes. But the trick with all that is, you know, how do you have a revelation? How do you have the rapture without impacting on the lives of all the children who are coming through, who need to discover the world themselves and construct their own meanings, their own raptures, their own paradises, and you know, all these conversations going on, but it's like you're in communion with the whole city at that particular time. And so there are very powerful experiences that we can learn from, and we don't have to just you know, suddenly put people in hospital, accuphase them and stop them from remembering those sorts of things.
Absolutely. And to recognize that, you know, that sort of experience is just a natural human experience. You know, it's not indicative of madness or going off the deep end or having another episode. I mean, that's the interpretation of psychiatry in the biomedical model for sure, but it's wrong. You know, it's just indisputably wrong, because I mean, that sort of experience has been happening since the beginning of time. You know, I mean, just while I was waiting for you here, for example, you know, a little guy, you know, a little tiny 3-year-old guy or something, we started having a chat, and he did this thing with his arms where he's, you know, sort of, you know, doing this great expression thing as if he's about to give an oration. And I went, wow, that's dramatic. And his father said, yes, you know, that's what he's like. You know, he gets right into the storytelling thing, and it's the narrative. And I went, oh, that's interesting. I'm doing this thing that's to do with the International Symposium of Storytelling and Narrative, you know, and that's an interesting thing. That's all it is. You know, it's synchronicity. You know, it's that, you know, it's that natural part of the world that's at one time, when I had no inkling whatsoever, I had no idea what synchronicity was. I had no idea what was going on. Synchronicities were dropping out of the heavens, left, right, and center. You know, you'd think of something, it had happened. You know, all of these people had come into your life and say exactly the right thing or give you exactly the right book or whatever, until such time as I thought I was mad, just because that's because in the background of our cultural conditioning, you know, that sort of mystical spiritual experience is connected with madness, really, and it's just not.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need, so this is the thing with the current way we treat people, to this idea of treatment and cure. Peter Kokan wrote a book about that, book of poems, to the treatment and the cure, which I did. No, that was his novel, sorry. He wrote some poems as well. But anyway, the thing is, we have to create spaces for people who are undergoing that sort of spiritual awakening or psychosis, so that, you know, so that they can have something. We can make sure they have something to eat. They do have a place to relax in and potentially sleep, and that we look after those physical needs that sometimes people who are undergoing a spiritual awakening or whatever don't look after themselves very well, you know, because they're focused on what's going on around them and the connections that they're making to the universe, sort of thing. So you know, I think that there are, unfortunately in Australia, there are a lot of emerging voices around this idea of poetry and articulating these experiences differently to what we normally would.
Absolutely. But it's that thing of, you know, it's that thing of power and powerlessness, because if the official medical response is to interpret those experiences, you know, your experience, my experience, a whole bunch of other people, you know, as obviously delusional and a hallucination, and obviously indicative of madness and schizophrenia and bipolar and all the rest of it, then, you know, and it's an abomination, because, you know, you and I can talk from now until the end of time and realize this and know that it's absolutely true, and, you know, that it's factual. And yet, you know, if you wig out for whatever reason, you know, next week or the week after, or if I went into me being the Messiah yet again, and Eve and all the rest of it, you know, damn, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that, you know, here's your straitjacket, off you go, girlie, there you go, Tim. Good fun, you know, and it's criminal, you know, it's just criminal. But anyway, we know this, you know, anyone with 2 brain cells, you know, knows this, and yet, you know, and yet.
Yeah, no, we know it, and yes. You know, I think I can, I congratulate you on what you're doing up there, and I love the ideas that you've brought to me. I've still got a lot of reading to do to catch up on, I must admit. I tend to be working a bit intuitively at times. It's
good thing, Tim. That's a good thing.
Yeah, but it's I think all we're trying to do, or I'm trying to do with work, so the work side of things, is to bring that voice of lived experience into this biomedical system, to change it, to disrupt it, and to hopefully construct something that is nurturing of people's individuality, of their creativity, of themselves, and not violent and forceful and dangerous. Because the system is more dangerous to us than we ever are to anybody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So thank you, really, thank you, and I sincerely hope that our little chat hasn't, dredged up any awfulness for you.
No, that's all good. It is a pleasure to talk to you, to have the opportunity to read a poem, which is good fun.
It is good fun because I always truly think, and one of the things that I do thank the mental health system for is the recovery model. It's that thing of journey. It always starts with hope. Part of it is pride and empowerment, and all of, and they're beautiful concepts. They're beautiful things to incorporate into your life, and you have to be justifiably proud of surviving for a start, but also producing things of beauty as well. That's a good thing. That's a gift, and to give it to the world is
yeah. I did pick out a poem specifically for you, so I have to read this one as we part. It's a lot shorter than the other one, so don't worry. It's from this book called Time. Okay, you got time?
I do have time, Tim. I'm at the beach.
So this is called On the Ladder. Okay. On the Ladder.
Okay.
The first writing ended in madness, but for 20 years, the words stayed in your head, trying to find shapes that would speak. This time you return to drafts of delusion, but the drafts of delusion return you to this time. On the ladder, you think of what to write, the second coming. At that precise moment, the words, the music, and the man meld. Meaning meets you, and you understand the pulse of the place, the beating of hearts, the chorus of uncertainty, the construction from nothing, the coming back to fix the temple, the houses of sticks, the clutching of straws, the building with beaks. Sometimes when the writing is good and the music is too, it is like you are wired. As you listen, the melody, the lyric prompts you, supports you, sings your sentence, and the breeze pushes you, gives you direction, tells you which way to go, which path to follow. The breeze breathes.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's phenomenally beautiful and telling and deep, and everything that poetry gives to us, really. And for you, just the way that I know you and that I'm hearing you read that, they are all of those beautiful answers that you seek, that we all seek, really. And they always have those connections to all sorts of different spiritual traditions, and it doesn't matter whether it's Catholicism or Buddhism or it doesn't matter, but all of those connections, all of those depths, those layers, that pure beauty of expression, is there. So thank you. Thank you
for your kind words.
Tim.
We are on a journey.
We are on a journey, Tim. We are. Your journey is hopefully going to bring you up to the Central Coast. Put it in your diary. Bring you.
We were supposed to be up there for a wedding in November, but it got cancelled, or postponed. So I think it's in February now.
Absolutely. So I'm sure it will be. Join the two things together.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tim. You're a gem.
Okay. See you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.